The static hummed, a low, persistent thrum against the backdrop of the Alaskan wilderness. September 14th, 2014. 15 years. 15 years since the airwaves went silent, since the last transmission faded into the vast, indifferent expanse of the Wrangell-St. Elias National Park. A geological survey team, contracted to assess permafrost stability near the remote Skolai Pass, stumbled upon it. Not a body, not a plane wreck, but something far more insidious, something that twisted the very fabric of absence into a tangible, horrifying presence. Buried beneath a thin layer of loamy soil, shielded by the gnarled roots of an ancient spruce, lay a waterproof Pelican case. Its latches, once bright, were now encrusted with the slow, deliberate work of time and moisture. Inside, nestled amongst desiccant packets that had long since surrendered their fight against the pervasive damp, was a single, meticulously preserved digital audio tape, a DAT cassette. It was an impossible discovery. No signal, no trace, just silence for a decade and a half. This was the territory of Liam O'Connell, a name that for years had been synonymous with the unsolved. Liam, a wilderness radio operator, a man of meticulous preparation and unwavering discipline, had vanished without a whisper on July the 12th, 1999. His disappearance was not merely a missing persons case, it was a void, a blank page in the harsh annals of Alaskan cold cases. His personal locator beacon, a state-of-the-art model for its time, never activated. His emergency radio, a rugged ICOM, never broadcast a distress call. His meticulously planned resupply drops, cached weeks in advance, remained untouched, silent sentinels of a journey abruptly interrupted. Imagine the scene. The geologist, Dr. Anya Sharma, brushing away the last vestiges of Earth, her gloved fingers tracing the faded stenciling on the case. Pelican 1510, property of L. O'Connell. The implication hung heavy in the crisp Alaskan air. This was not merely an artifact, it was a voice from the grave, a testament to a final desperate act of documentation. The tape's retrieval initiated a forensic odyssey that would span years. The initial analysis was guarded. The tape, despite its preservation, was an unknown quantity. Could it have survived 15 Alaskan winters, the thaws, the deep freezes, the relentless moisture, the seismic shifts of a dynamic landscape? The answer, incredibly, was yes. The Pelican case, designed for extreme conditions, had performed its grim duty. The DAT cassette, a format chosen by Liam for its superior audio fidelity and robust data storage, proved remarkably resilient. The grieving investigators, a small, dedicated team from the Alaskan State Troopers Cold Case Unit, approached it with a reverence born of long-frustrated hope. Detective Sergeant Elias Vance, a man whose career was punctuated by the intractable mysteries of the last frontier, oversaw the process. He had known O'Connell in passing, a quiet, intensely focused individual, known for his almost obsessive commitment to safety protocols and equipment maintenance. The irony was a bitter taste in Vance's mouth, a man defined by his preparedness, swallowed whole by the wilderness he so respected. The data extraction took weeks. Specialized equipment was flown in, a clean room established, and the utmost care taken to avoid any degradation of the magnetic tape. Every byte was precious, every second of potential audio a potential window into the impossible. The first moments of playback were met with a collective, held breath. Static. Then a voice, Liam O'Connell's voice, calm, professional, and entirely mundane. July 8, 1999, 0715, AKDT. Base camp log, entry 0573, conditions clear, light breeze from the south. Commencing daily equipment checks, all systems nominal. Anticipating resupply drop Delta 7 on schedule for the 14th, over, a routine log entry. The banality of it was almost painful. It was the voice of a man utterly in control, a master of his domain, completely unaware of the abyss that lay before him. The tape, an initial 6-hour recording, stretched back further than the last known transmission, a crucial detail that reshaped the entire timeline of O'Connell's disappearance. It meant he had continued to operate, continued to log, continued to exist beyond the point where the official record ended. The void, as it had been termed by investigators, was suddenly filled with the ghost of his presence. The forensic audio specialists meticulously cataloged every crackle of static, every subtle shift in background noise. They employed spectral analysis to identify ambient sounds, the distant cry of a raven, the rush of a glacial stream, the whisper of wind through the tundra grass. Each soundbite was a fragment, a piece of a puzzle they hoped would eventually cohere into a coherent narrative. The initial 6 hours of audio were just the beginning. The tape itself contained far more. The digital metadata embedded within the DAT format proved to be a goldmine. Timestamp pacing became the rhythm of their investigation. At 8:19 AKDT July 8th, O'Connell documented a routine radio check with a research station hundreds of miles away. Station Alpha, this is Echo Niner. Radio check over. The crisp professional reply confirmed his equipment was functioning perfectly. At 9:37 AKDT, he recorded a personal observation, a rare deviation from his strictly professional logs. Magnificent sunrise over Mount Bona today almost makes you forget the gnats. A flicker of humanity, a brief glimpse into the man behind the microphone. These mundane details, once dismissed as irrelevant, now formed a chilling tapestry of his final days. The rule of irony began to assert itself with brutal clarity. Liam O'Connell's meticulousness, his obsession with procedure and documentation, which had made him an exemplary wilderness operator, was now providing an excruciatingly detailed chronicle of his own impending doom. His greatest strength was becoming the very instrument of his posthumous investigation. The tape was not just a recording, it was a forensic image of his last moments captured in magnetic particles. As the hours of audio unfolded, a subtle shift in tone became apparent. It wasn't immediate, not a sudden break, but a creeping unease, like the slow descent of an Alaskan twilight. July 9th, 1999, 0645 AKDT. Base camp log, entry 0574. Slight atmospheric interference this morning. Running diagnostics on primary transceiver. Backup system nominal. Over. The interference was noted but not emphasized. A professional observation. Yet, the forensic specialist noted a subtle increase in the frequency of these observations over the subsequent hours. At 1412 AKDT, O'Connell logged another radio check, but this time the exchange was clipped, the response from the distant station less clear. Echo Niner, you're breaking up. Repeat, over. O'Connell's voice remained calm, but the underlying tension in the transmission was palpable. The mountains in their silent indifference were beginning to exert their influence. The early recordings featured the vibrant sounds of the Alaskan summer, birdsong, the rustle of leaves, the distant roar of a bear. As the tape progressed, these sounds receded, replaced by an increasing dominance of static, a rising tide of white noise that threatened to drown out O'Connell's voice. The impossible discovery continued to yield its secrets. The visual cue prompts, the imagined slow pans over weathered objects, found their sonic equivalent in the grinding granular texture of the tape itself. Flashbulb transitions became the jarring shifts between a clear signal and a burst of inexplicable interference. The static-filled archival footage was the literal experience of listening to these recordings. Text overlays of specific dates and times were provided by O'Connell's own methodical timestamping. Every detail mattered, every whisper of abnormality amplified by the weight of what was to come. The initial 6 hours gave way to 12, then 18. The investigators were gripped, drawn into O'Connell's world, a world slowly being consumed by an unseen force. The raw data became a character itself, a silent witness to an unfolding tragedy. The irony was relentless. O'Connell, the master of communication, was slowly losing his ability to communicate, even as he painstakingly documented the process. July 10th, 1999, 0702 AKDT. Base camp log 0575, persistent low-level interference, origin unknown, running full system diagnostics, all components testing within acceptable parameters, no apparent hardware malfunction. Over. This was the first hint of genuine perplexity in O'Connell's logs. The origin unknown was a significant departure from his usual precise technical assessments. The grieving investigators felt a chill. They knew what O'Connell didn't. They knew that in 2 days he would simply cease to exist. They knew that the acceptable parameters were a cruel deception. The ambient noise analysis became critical here. The spectral patterns of the interference didn't match typical atmospheric conditions, nor did they align with known man-made signals. It was a unique signature, an auditory anomaly that defied classification. The silence between O'Connell's statements grew longer, punctuated by the increasingly aggressive hiss of the static. The tape became a journey into the unknown, a meticulously recorded descent into the inexplicable. At 11:45 AKDT, July 10th, O'Connell attempted to contact Station Alpha again. Station Alpha, this is Echo Niner. Do you copy? Over. The reply was barely discernible, a garbled mess of digital noise. Echo Niner. Repeat. Breaking up. Unable to confirm. The frustration in O'Connell's voice, though still professional, was undeniable. Understood, Station Alpha. We'll attempt again later. Echo Niner out. It was a small crack in his stoic facade, a momentary glimpse of the human behind the unwavering professional. The grieving investigator, Detective Vance, found himself pacing his office late into the night, listening to these segments on a loop. He imagined O'Connell alone in his remote camp, meticulously checking his equipment, his brow furrowed in concentration, grappling with a problem that had no technical solution. The open-loop question began to haunt them. Why would a man so skilled, so prepared, find himself in a situation he couldn't explain, a situation that would ultimately erase him? The mountains don't explain why. The mountains keep their secrets. By the evening of July 11th, the interference had escalated dramatically. 19:30 AKDT. Base camp log 0576. Interference now constant, uninterrupted. All attempts to establish external communication have failed. Local comms are also degraded. Attempted contact with resupply plane frequency, no response. Initiating emergency protocols, battery levels stable. External power sources engaged. Over. This was the first explicit mention of an emergency. The methodical, slow-burn rhythm of the narrative now picked up a chilling, frantic pulse. O'Connell's voice was still calm, but a subtle tremor was detectable in his words, a barely perceptible waver in his practiced cadence. The forensic audio specialists isolated the low-frequency hum that had become a constant companion to the static. It was deep, resonant, and seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. It felt like the land itself was groaning, a primeval force awakening. Imagine you are standing in that remote Alaskan wilderness, the sun dipping below the jagged peaks, casting long purple shadows. The air is cold, silent, except for the insistent growing hum, a vibration that you feel in your teeth, in your bones. O'Connell, the expert victim, surrounded by his advanced equipment, his meticulously organized camp, found himself utterly isolated, severed from the world by an invisible wall of noise. The rule of irony screamed its presence. All his contingency plans, his redundant systems, his rigorous checks, were rendered moot by an enemy that defied categorization. The evidence log, which would later detail the untouched contents of his resupply cache, spoke volumes about his inability to even attempt a coordinated escape or distress call. The tape, in its agonizing detail, chronicled his growing understanding of his predicament. He was trapped, not by a physical barrier, but by a wall of sound, a curtain of static that swallowed every attempt at communication. July 12, 1999, the final day, the day Liam O'Connell became a ghost, 6:10 AKDT. Base camp log 0577, interference at maximum intensity, unable to transmit or receive any signal. Visual conditions are clear, no apparent weather anomaly, no unusual animal activity. attempting to triangulate interference source with directional antenna. Minimal success. Signal appears to be omnidirectional. Over. His analytical mind, even in the face of the incomprehensible, was still attempting to find a logical explanation, a technical solution. This was the mark of the expert victim, meticulously documenting his own demise. The static in these final hours dominated the audio. O'Connell's voice became a struggle against the overwhelming roar, a desperate attempt to be heard, if only by himself, if only by the silent magnetic tape that now held his last testament. The audio forensic team discovered something truly unsettling in these final transmissions. Beneath the static, beneath the low hum, were fleeting, almost subliminal snippets of something else. Not language, not music, but modulated tones, rhythmic pulses that seemed to follow an unnatural geometric pattern. They were too fleeting to analyze fully, too buried in the noise, but their presence was undeniable. The haunting and melancholic emotional tone of the investigation reached its zenith. They were listening to a man fighting an invisible war, documenting a phenomenon that would eventually consume him. The rhetorical echo of "the mountains don't explain why" reverberated through the sterile lab as they listened to Liam O'Connell's final desperate entries. They were witnesses, 15 years too late, to a tragedy that defied all known parameters of wilderness survival. The tape offered justice through memory, a remembrance of a man meticulously consumed by the incomprehensible. July 12, 1999, 0822 AKDT. Basecamp log entry 0578. The hum has shifted. It is no longer a sound. It is a physical sensation. Pressure in the inner ear, persistent. I am experiencing significant GPS drift. The handheld unit shows my position shifting 300 meters to the east, then snapping back. I am stationary. I have not moved from the comms tent. Visual checks confirm my location relative to the Skolai Peaks. Metadata indicates a systemic failure of local positioning. Why would the satellites lie? The voice on the tape was becoming thinner, as if O'Connell was being drawn away from the microphone by an unseen tide. The grieving investigators sat in the sterile silence of the Anchorage lab, leaning toward the speakers. GPS drift was common in deep canyons or under heavy tree cover, but here in the wide-open alpine tundra of the pass, it was a technical impossibility. The satellites weren't lying, the reality on the ground was being rewritten. The forensic analysts synchronized the audio with O'Connell's recovered logbook. The handwriting for July 12th was different. The usually precise architectural lettering was jagged, the ink heavy where the pen had pressed too hard into the paper. 0914 AKDT. Attempting to reset the primary transceiver, the frequency display is cycling rapidly. It is scanning through bands that shouldn't exist in this hardware's range. I am hearing voices, not human, too fast, too high, like a recording played at 10 times the speed. I am recording the output directly to this tape. If anyone finds this, check the frequency modulation at the 9-minute mark. The audio specialists paused the playback. They isolated the segment O'Connell had highlighted. Under extreme digital magnification, the voices were revealed. They weren't vocalizations. They were complex, high-density data bursts. They sounded like a modem from hell, a rhythmic screeching sequence that pulsed with a mathematical precision. When visualized on a spectrograph, the signals formed intricate, interlocking lattices. They weren't random noise. They were architecture. 0945 AKDT. The perimeter wire is vibrating, no wind. The air is perfectly still, but the wire is humming so loud it's shaking the tent poles. I went outside to check the guy lines. The soil around the stakes is displaced. It looks like it's been vibrated into a liquid state, liquefaction, but there's no seismic activity, no tremor, just the hum. The forensic casual tone of the narrator in the lab noted that liquefaction usually requires a massive release of energy, like an earthquake of magnitude 7.0 or higher. Yet the nearest seismic station at McCarthy had recorded a day of absolute tectonic silence. O'Connell was describing a localized physical anomaly that defied the laws of thermodynamics. Imagine you are standing where he stood. Your boots are sinking into solid earth that has suddenly turned to the consistency of quicksand, yet the mountains around you are as still as a painting. The sensory dissonance would be shattering. 10:30 AKDT. I can no longer see the peaks. A haze has moved in. Not fog, it's a distortion. Like heat shimmer, but cold. It's bending the light. I am looking at the Skolai Glacier, but it appears to be inverted. I am losing my sense of equilibrium. I am retreating into the tent. The Faraday cage should provide some shielding. I am taking the DAT recorder with me. The Faraday cage was a makeshift enclosure O'Connell had built out of copper mesh to protect his sensitive radio equipment from solar flares. It was his sanctuary, his greatest strength. The rule of irony dictated that this very shield would become his tomb. The audio quality changed at this point. The acoustics became tighter, the background hiss of the wilderness replaced by the metallic resonance of the copper mesh. 11:15 AKDT. The clock has stopped. Not just the digital one on the console, my mechanical watch. The second hand is twitching, back and forth. It cannot decide which way time is moving. I am feeling a profound sense of nausea, a metallic taste in my mouth, like sucking on a copper penny. This is indicative of high-intensity electromagnetic exposure, but there is no source, no power lines, no transmitters, just me and the mountains. The investigators noted the symptoms, the metallic taste, the nausea, the temporal distortion. These are the hallmarks of a localized gravitational or electromagnetic event of unprecedented scale. O'Connell was being cooked from the inside out by a force that left no scorched earth, no burnt trees. 1200 hours AKDT. Midday, the sun should be directly overhead. It is dark, not the darkness of a storm. The sky is a deep bruised purple. The stars are visible. I can see Orion. In July, at noon. This shouldn't be possible. I am checking the compass. The needle is spinning. It won't settle. It's like the North Pole has decided to wander across the valley. The grieving investigator, Vance, looked at the official weather reports from July 12, 1999. Clear skies, unlimited visibility, no solar storms, no atmospheric anomalies. To the rest of the world, it was a beautiful summer day. To Liam O'Connell, it was the end of the world. The mountains don't explain why. They simply witness. 1320 AKDT. The hum is now a scream. I have my aviation headsets on, maxed out on noise cancellation, and it's still piercing. It's coming from inside my head now. I am looking at my hands. The skin is translucent. I can see the bones. I can see the blood moving in the veins. I am becoming less. I am recording this because I need to know if I am still here. If the tape can hear me, then I am still real. The fragmented emphasis in his voice was heartbreaking. The confident professional had been stripped away, leaving only a man clinging to the last shred of his reality, his equipment. He was an expert in communication, and he was using his last breaths to communicate his own dissolution. 1445 AKDT. Something is outside the tent. Not a bear, not a person. It's a shadow that has no source. It's moving across the copper mesh. It's not blocking the light. It's consuming it. I am holding the recorder. I am not going to leave the cage. If I leave the cage, I think I will cease to be. Why is it so quiet now? The hum has stopped. The silence is worse. The silence is heavy. The open loop question hung in the air. What was the shadow? In the 15 years that the tape lay buried, the wilderness had reclaimed the site. When the geologists found the case, there was no tent, no copper mesh, no skeletal remains, no ICOM radio. Just the Pelican case, buried as if it had been placed there by a careful hand, or perhaps dropped from a great height. 1530 AKDT. I am going to attempt to bury the records. I have the Pelican case ready. If I can get it under the roots of the spruce, maybe it will survive. I don't think I will. My legs are... I can't feel my legs. They look like they're made of smoke. I am crawling. The recorder is still running. I am taking it with me to the tree. The sound of the tape changed again, the rustle of nylon, the heavy, labored breathing of a man in physical agony, the sound of metal dragging on stone. This was the reconstruction. The investigators could trace his path from the tent to the tree by the changes in the ambient noise. 1602 AKDT. The tree is different. The bark is glowing, a soft bioluminescent green. It's warm, the only warm thing in this valley. I am placing the case in the hollow between the roots. I am sorry. I am so sorry I didn't finish the survey. To whoever finds this, do not stay here. The ground is not solid. The air is not air. The apology was the most devastating part. Even as his physical form was failing, his sense of duty remained. He was the expert victim, apologizing for his inability to survive the unsurvivable. 1615 AKDT. The recording becomes a chaotic symphony of white noise. But within the noise there are distinct rhythmic thuds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then a voice that is not O'Connell's. It is a voice that sounds like 1,000 voices speaking at once, a harmonic resonance that vibrates the very tape itself. It doesn't speak a language, it speaks a frequency. The audio levels redline, distorting into a harsh digital scream that lasts for exactly 33 seconds. 1616 AKDT. Silence. Not the silence of a stopped recording, but the silence of an empty room. The tape continues to spin for another 4 hours and 44 minutes. In that time, there are no birds, no wind, no footsteps, just the steady rhythmic hiss of the tape's noise floor. It is the sound of a vacuum. At the 6-hour mark, the tape reaches its end and stops. Liam O'Connell was gone. No body was ever found. No scrap of his tent, no shard of his radio, no thread of his clothing. Just the case, just the tape. The discovery of the tape in 2014 reopened the case, but it offered no closure. It only deepened the mystery. The narrative truth was more terrifying than the void. It suggested that there are places in the wilderness where the laws of physics are suspended, where the earth is thin and where something else, something indifferent and ancient, occasionally reaches through. The grieving investigators were left with a legacy of static and a moral warning. The mountains keep their secrets, and sometimes those secrets are best left buried. Imagine you are standing on that summit, looking down into the Skolai Pass. The air is still, the peaks are majestic, but you know what lies beneath the spruce, you know the price of curiosity. The final analysis of the tape revealed one last chilling detail. In the final 4 hours of silence, the spectral analysis picked up a faint repeating signal. It was O'Connell's voice, but it was reversed, slowed down to a fraction of its original speed, and layered over itself 1,000 times. It wasn't a message, it was a loop. He was saying his own name over and over again, a digital ghost trapped in a magnetic prison. Liam, Liam, Liam. The sound of a man trying to remember who he was as he was being unmade. The investigation concluded that O'Connell had likely succumbed to an unidentified atmospheric phenomenon, a catch-all term that meant the state had no idea what happened but needed to close the file. But the investigators knew better. They had heard the scream. They had seen the spectrographs. They knew that Liam O'Connell hadn't just died. He had been erased. And the most haunting part? The GPS coordinates recorded in the tape's metadata for the final entry didn't point to the Skolai Pass. They pointed to a location 300 miles above the Earth's surface, in the vacuum of space. Why would the satellites lie? The Pelican case was returned to the evidence locker. The tape was digitized and encrypted, its contents classified under a public safety exemption that prevented further release. But the story leaked. It became a legend among radio operators and wilderness hikers. A warning: don't go to the Skolai, don't listen to the hum. The mountains don't explain why, they don't have to. They are the why. As you look at the macro shots of the rust on the case, the moss on the spruce roots, you realize that nature is not a backdrop. It is an actor. It is a force. And Liam O'Connell, for all his preparation, was just a data point in a much larger, much darker calculation. The slow pans over his weathered objects, his compass, his watch, his logbook, are all that remain of a life spent seeking the truth in the wild. The truth, it turns out, was more than he could communicate. The final section of the tape, the last few seconds before the end, contains one more sound, a click. The sound of a recorder being turned off. But O'Connell was already gone. His hands were smoke. His legs were gone. So who turned off the recorder? The mountains keep their secrets. The moral warning is clear. We believe that we can map the world, that we can understand it through metadata and GPS and forensic imaging. But the world is larger than our maps. There are voids that cannot be filled. There are voices that shouldn't be heard. And sometimes the most dangerous thing you can find in the wilderness is a way to tell the story of your own disappearance. The grieving investigator, Elias Vance, retired shortly after the case was closed. He moved to a small town in Arizona, far from the mountains, far from the cold. But he still has the transcripts. He still wakes up in the middle of the night, hearing that low-frequency hum in his teeth. He knows that the tape is still out there, somewhere in the digital ether, a 6-hour testament to the impossible. He knows that Liam O'Connell is still saying his name. The story of the radio operator who vanished in 1999 is not a story of a missing person. It is a story of a found silence, a silence that speaks louder than any transmission, a silence that reminds us that we are only ever guests in the vast, indifferent expanse of the world. And the mountains? The mountains are still there, waiting. The metadata for this document is complete. The forensic image is saved, the reconstruction is finished, but the open loop remains. Why would they do this? Why would the mountains take a man of such skill, such heart, and leave only a tape? Perhaps because the tape is the only thing that could survive the truth. Perhaps because the truth is too heavy for a human soul to carry. The final visual cue, a macro shot of a single DAT tape, spinning slowly in a dark room. The green light of the play button is the only illumination. The static fills the air, and then for a split second the green light flickers. It turns red, recording. Something is still listening. July 13th, 1999. The official timeline had always ended here, but the discovery in 2014 revealed a harrowing extension of the record. 1745, AKDT. Base camp log 0579. The air has a weight now. It feels like moving through mercury. I have begun to notice a recurring pattern in the radio interference. It isn't random, it's a sequence. Every 14 minutes and 22 seconds, the static clears for a window of exactly 3 seconds. In that window, I can hear a signal. It isn't coming from the ionosphere. It's coming from the ground beneath the tent. The grieving investigators followed this lead with the obsession of men looking for a crack in a fortress. They subjected the 3-second windows to forensic filtration. What they found was a series of coordinates, not geographic but celestial, right ascension and declination. The expert victim, even as his physical environment warped, was translating the impossible into the language of his craft. He was a radio operator to the very end. 1812, AKDT. The shadows are no longer just outside, they are manifesting within the Faraday cage. They look like geometric silhouettes shifting across the equipment rack. When they touch the metal, it frosts over, instantaneous crystallization. I measured the temperature of the frost with the infrared thermometer, minus 40 degrees Celsius, in a tent that is currently 22 degrees. There is no transfer of heat. It is a violation of the second law of thermodynamics. Entropy is reversing in this localized space. I am recording the thermal imaging data now. The screen in the lab showed the digital reconstruction of that frost. Ferrous, crystalline structures that looked like frozen lightning. O'Connell's voice was now accompanied by a brittle snapping sound, the sound of the air itself being fractured by the extreme cold of the shadows. 1900 AKDT. I am losing the ability to distinguish between internal and external noise. The hum is vibrating my skull. My vision is fracturing into a kaleidoscopic overlay. I am seeing the valley as it was and as it will be. I see the glacier retreating in a fast-forward blur, and then I see it as a wall of ice a mile high. I am unanchored. I have lashed myself to the equipment rack with climbing webbing. I do not want to float away. Why is the gravity so inconsistent? My logbook just drifted to the ceiling and stayed there for 10 minutes. It is now resting on the floor again. The forensic casual narrator notes that the expert victim was likely experiencing a breakdown of the local space-time manifold. To the investigators, this wasn't just a ghost story, it was a physics disaster. The metadata showed that during these periods, the recorder's internal clock was skipping. The intervals between bytes were inconsistent, suggesting the tape was capturing a reality that was physically stretching and compressing. 2030 AKDT. The voices in the static have become intelligible. They aren't speaking English or any language I recognize, but I understand the intent. They are measuring me. It feels like a cold needle passing through every cell of my body. A forensic audit of a biological entity. I am being digitized. Every memory, every impulse, every sequence of my DNA is being read by the hum. I am not a person anymore. I am a packet of data being prepared for transmission. The rule of irony was at its most cruel here. O'Connell, a man who spent his life transmitting data, was now the data. The grieving investigator proxy, watching the waveforms on the monitor, saw the moment O'Connell's voice began to merge with the background radiation. The harmonic frequencies of his speech were being mirrored by the interference, a perfect acoustic mimicry. 2115 AKDT. The sun hasn't moved in 3 hours. It is pinned to the horizon. The shadows are long, frozen. I can see the survey team from 1954. They are standing on the ridge looking down. They are translucent. They don't see me. They are just a loop. The mountains keep their secrets by recording everything that ever happens here. I am just the latest track on the record. I am going to try to break the loop. I am going to modulate the transmitter to the exact frequency of the hum. If I can create a phase cancellation, maybe I can stabilize the field. The technical audacity of the plan was breathtaking. O'Connell was attempting to use a standard ICOM radio to perform a feat of quantum engineering. He was fighting for his existence with a soldering iron and a frequency dial, 2200 AKDT. Phase modulation initiated. The hum is fighting back. The tent is vibrating so violently the fabric is tearing. I can see the sky through the rips. It's not the sky, it's a grid, a mathematical lattice of pulsing light. The stars are just nodes in a network. I am looking at the source code of the world. It's beautiful. It's terrifying. I am sorry, Sarah. I should have stayed in Anchorage. I should have never looked for the signal. This was the first mention of a personal connection. Sarah, his wife. The evidence log of his life was being deleted, leaving only this final, desperate apology. The investigators found Sarah O'Connell in 2015. She had lived for 15 years in the shadow of the unknown, never knowing that her husband's last thoughts were recorded on a tape buried in the dirt. 2345 AKDT. The phase cancellation worked. For a moment, the gravity returned. My logbook fell. But the cost was too high. The equipment is melting. The copper mesh is glowing white-hot. I have to leave the cage. The shadows are waiting at the door. They aren't silhouettes anymore. They have depth. They are three-dimensional voids. I am taking the Pelican case. I have to reach the tree. The tree is a grounding point. It's the only thing that isn't shifting. The slow burn rhythm reached a fever pitch. The sound of the zipper on the tent was like a gunshot. Then the sound of the Alaskan night, or whatever the night had become. The audio was a cacophony of wind that sounded like voices and voices that sounded like wind. July 14th, 1999, 0100 AKDT. I am at the tree. The roots are welcoming. The soil is soft here. It doesn't feel like liquefaction. It feels like a grave. I am placing the recorder inside. I can see the search planes. They are in the future. I see them flying over the pass in 3 days. I am waving at them, but I am in the wrong time. They can't see a man who hasn't disappeared yet, or a man who disappeared years ago. The mountains don't explain why time is a circle. The open loop. Question: was O'Connell seeing his own search party? The forensic analysis of the search logs from July 1999 showed that pilot Mark Sterling reported a glint of light near the spruce tree on his third pass, but when ground teams arrived, there was nothing. No glint, no man. Just the indifferent silence of the Skolai, 230 AKDT. The hum has returned, but it's different now. It's melodic. It's a lullaby. I am so tired. The skin on my arms is almost gone now. I am just a glow, a faint blue luminescence. I am going to lie down between the roots. I am going to become part of the record. To whoever finds this, the frequency is 142.85 megahertz. Don't listen for too long. It starts to listen back. This was the final instruction, the technical legacy of the expert victim. The investigators checked the frequency. It was a restricted band, supposedly empty. When they tuned a receiver to it at the site in 2014, they heard nothing but the wind. But the grieving investigator Vance noticed that the grass around the tree always leaned toward the trunk, even when the wind blew the other way. 0400 AKDT. The tape captures a long rhythmic sound, like a heartbeat but much slower. One beat every 60 seconds. The sound of the earth breathing. O'Connell is no longer speaking. There is only the sound of the breathing and the faint distant chime of a bell. The bell is an impossibility. There are no bells in the Wrangell-St. Elias. The reconstruction suggests this was a localized auditory hallucination or a signal from a different track on the mountain's record. The atmospheric mystery had reached its point of no return. The secret government inquiry began 3 months after the tape was found. A team from the Office of Scientific Intelligence, OSI, arrived in Anchorage. They didn't ask about O'Connell. They asked about the frequency modulation and the geometric silhouettes. They took the original DAT tape and replaced it with a digital forensic copy. They told Vance the case was a matter of national security. They mentioned high-frequency active auroral research and transient luminescent events. They used technical terms to bury the horror. They tried to turn a tragedy into a data set, but the data set was incomplete. The OSI team couldn't explain the last 30 minutes of the tape. The static-filled archival footage of the spectrum analyzer showed that in those final minutes, the tape wasn't recording sound at all. It was recording a magnetic signature that shouldn't have been able to interface with a DAT head. It was recording the narrative truth of a physical ascension. O'Connell wasn't just dying, he was being pulled out of the three-dimensional world, one pixel at a time. The macro shots of the tape itself showed physical pitting on the magnetic surface, as if it had been struck by microscopic particles of immense energy. The investigators were left with the justice through memory. They wrote a report that would never be published. They told a story that would never be televised. They became the keepers of Liam O'Connell's ghost. They realized that the expert victim hadn't failed. He had succeeded in the only way he could. He had left a map for the next person who would get lost in the Skolai. A map made of sound and static. A map that ended at a tree that shouldn't be warm. The moral warning evolved. It wasn't just about the wilderness anymore. It was about the arrogance of communication. We think that by labeling something, by recording it, we control it. But some things are beyond the reach of our frequencies. Some things use our own tools to find us. Liam O'Connell turned on his radio to call for help, and something answered the call. Something that had been waiting for a signal since the mountains were young. 0414 AKDT. The transduction begins. This is the phase where the audio shifts from a chronicle of a man to a record of a transition. The forensic analysis of this segment is the most guarded secret of the O'Connell file. There are no more words. There is no more breathing. Instead, the tape begins to vibrate with a sequence of harmonic oscillations that defy the mechanical limitations of the DAT recorder. The grieving investigator Vance described it as the sound of a star being born in a small room. It is a high-gravity acoustic event. The forensic casual explanation is that the magnetic tape was being rewritten by a localized gravitational wave. The metadata for these final minutes is a chaotic swarm of zeros and ones. A digital scream that suggests the recorder was no longer in our version of linear time. 0445 AKDT. A new sound emerges from the white noise. It is rhythmic, echoing, and profoundly alien. It sounds like the grinding of tectonic plates but modulated into a melodic sequence. It is the narrative truth of the mountain. The spectral analysis of this section shows that the sound waves are forming geometric shapes in the frequency display, perfect hexagons and triangles that pulse in time with the audio. Imagine you are standing in the Skolai Pass at this exact moment. The air is no longer cold, it is gone. You are standing in a vacuum, surrounded by a cathedral of light that has no source. You are the expert victim, and you have finally reached the center of the signal. The open loop question: what did Liam see in those final seconds? The tape suggests he saw everything. 0512 AKDT. The audio levels drop to a whisper. In the background, there is a faint distant sound of a radio broadcast. It isn't 1999. It's a broadcast from 1942, a news report about the war in the Pacific. Then a shift. A broadcast from 2024, a weather report for the Anchorage Bowl. The tape was acting as a temporal sponge, soaking up signals from across the 20th and 21st centuries. The rule of irony reaches its terminal point. O'Connell, the man who wanted to send one clear signal, became a receiver for all of time. He became the antenna for the world's secrets. The grieving investigator felt a sense of profound vertigo listening to this. It was the sound of a man being dissolved into the electromagnetic spectrum. 0530 AKDT. The final entry. There is a click, not the mechanical click of the recorder, but the sound of a latch closing. Then Liam O'Connell's voice returns for one last impossible sentence. It is clear, it is crisp, it has no static. "It's not a void," he says. His voice sounds younger, lighter, as if the weight of the mountains has finally been lifted. "It's a library." Then the sound of a heavy door swinging shut. The static-filled archival footage of the audio wave shows a flat line. Not the flat line of a dead signal, but a perfect silent line of absolute zero. No hiss, no floor noise, just a hole in the universe, 545 AKDT. The tape continues to spin for another 15 minutes, but there is nothing left. Even the background radiation of the universe has been scrubbed from the magnetic particles. The macro shots of dirt, moss, or rust on the Pelican case in 2014 show that the physical object survived, but the man inside the story had been converted into pure information. The discovery phase was over. The reconstruction was complete. The grieving investigator Elias Vance closed his laptop and sat in the dark. He realized that the impossible discovery wasn't the tape. It was the realization that we are never truly alone in the wilderness. We are being recorded. We are being archived. The moral warning of the O'Connell transmissions is a heavy burden. It tells us that our technology is not a shield. It is a lure. Our radios, our GPS units, our cell phones, they are beacons in a dark ocean, and sometimes something swims up from the depths to see what is making all that noise. The expert victim did everything right, and that is exactly why he was taken. He was the most interesting signal in the valley. He was a high-fidelity soul. The mountains don't explain why, because the why is beyond our frequency. We are only the ghosts of the future, waving at a past that has already forgotten us. The final visual cue is a slow pan out from the spruce tree in the Skolai Pass. The camera moves higher and higher until the pass is just a wrinkle in the vast Alaskan range. The text overlay appears, September 14th, 2014. The case remains open, but as the image fades to black, the low-frequency hum returns for one last second. It is the sound of a page turning in a library that has no end. The narrative truth is that Liam O'Connell didn't vanish. He was filed away. Imagine you are standing on that summit now. The wind is cold. The silence is absolute. You reach for your radio, your thumb hovering over the transmit button. You want to say your name. You want to be heard. But you remember the tape. You remember the hum. You remember the man who became a frequency. And you realize that the most powerful thing you can do in the face of the mountain is to stay silent. Because once you speak, the library knows you are there. The mountains keep their secrets, and now you are one of them. The 15-year silence was not a void. It was a gestation. The tape found in 2014 was the birth of a new understanding of our place in the wild. We are not the masters of the frontier. We are the data points. The grieving investigator. Vance never spoke of the case again, but he kept a single DAT tape on his mantelpiece, a silent reminder of the man who went into the static and found the truth. The story ends here, but the signal continues. Somewhere in the 142.85 megahertz band, Liam O'Connell is still transmitting. He is still telling us that the ground is not solid. He is still telling us that the air is not air. Do you copy? Over and out. The forensic inventory of the Pelican case 1510 serves as the final silent witness to the meticulous nature of a man being unmade. Item 1. A digital audio tape, the contents of which have rewritten the history of the Skolai Pass. Item 2. A Suunto MC2 global compass, the needle housing warped as if subjected to a localized thermal bloom, the liquid damping fluid replaced by a fine gray ash. Item 3. A ruggedized notebook, the first 40 pages containing standard meteorological observations, the remaining pages blank except for a single deep indentation of a geometric pattern that matches the spectral lattices found on the tape. Item 4, a wedding band, gold, 14 karat, found not on a finger but fused to the interior plastic of the case, a molecular bond that should be impossible without the application of industrial-grade heat, yet the plastic shows no signs of melting. This is the evidence log of a transition. The grieving investigator, Elias Vance, would spend his final years obsessed with these granular details, the mundane objects that survived a journey their owner did not. He would often hold the forensic images of the compass, tracing the warped housing with his thumb, wondering at what point the north ceased to be north for Liam O'Connell. The narrative. Truth is not found in the grand gestures of the cosmos, but in the ruined gear of a man who was prepared for everything except the fundamental betrayal of reality. Imagine you are standing on the edge of that pass, the wind whipping through your gear, the same model of radio clipped to your belt. You feel the weight of the expert victim's legacy. You realize that his greatest strength, his absolute reliance on the predictable laws of physics and the reliability of his equipment, was the very thing that anchored him to the spot as the world dissolved. Had he been less prepared, less disciplined, he might have fled at the first sign of the hum. But O'Connell was a chronicler. He stayed to record the end of the world, and in doing so, he became a part of the record he sought to create. The archive is not just a collection of tapes and notebooks. It is a living resonance within the Wrangell-St. Elias. The mountains keep their secrets, but they also keep their residents. The forensic casual tone of the official report concludes that O'Connell is legally deceased, but the audio forensic team knows better. They have heard the subharmonic frequencies that suggest his consciousness was not extinguished, but merely transposed. The data bursts, the modem from hell, the screeching lattices, these are the new architecture of Liam O'Connell. He is the signal in the static, the ghost in the machine of the wilderness. The moral warning is not for the hikers or the hunters, but for the seekers of truth. It is a warning about the price of looking too closely at the gaps in the universe. We use technical terms like GPS drift, thermal imaging, and metadata to give ourselves the illusion of control, to convince ourselves that the world is a known quantity. But the tape proves that there are variables we haven't even named yet. There are frequencies that don't just transmit information, they transmit existence. The open-loop question remains, if the mountains are a library, who are the readers? And what happens when they decide to check out a new volume? The grieving investigator Vance never found the answer, but he found a form of justice through memory. He ensured that Liam's name was not just a footnote in a missing persons file, but a permanent entry in the ledger of the unexplained. He understood that the story of the radio operator who vanished in 1999 was a testament to the fragility of the human signal in a world dominated by ancient, indifferent noise. The final forensic image is a macro shot of the spruce tree's bark where the Pelican case was found. Under ultraviolet light, the bark reveals a faint glowing residue, a pattern of microscopic pits that match the data pits on the DAT tape. The tree is not just a tree, it is a storage device. The landscape itself has been encoded with the tragedy of July 12, 1999. As the camera pans back, the flashbulb transitions jump through time, 1999, 2014, 2026, showing the slow, methodical growth of the moss over the site. The static-filled archival footage of the original search fades into the crisp, high-definition silence of the present. The hum is gone, replaced by the rhythmic echo of a heart that beats once every minute, the sound of a planet that is slowly, patiently waiting for the next signal. The total length of the record is now 8,000 words, a wall of text that acts as a monument to a man who became a frequency. The metadata is locked, the forensic image is saved, the reconstruction is complete. Liam O'Connell is gone, but the tape is still spinning. It will always be spinning. Do you copy? The mountains don't explain why, they don't have to. They are the ending. They are the over and out. The final batch of evidence is catalogued. The narrative truth is established. The expert victim has been archived. The grieving investigator has retired into the silence. All that remains is the warning. When you go into the wild, remember that you are not just a visitor, you are a broadcast. And somewhere in the dark, something is always tuning in. The end of the transmission is not the end of the story, it is merely the point where the static takes over. The final visual cue, a text overlay on a black screen. July 12, 1999, 06:16:33, signal terminated. The hum persists for a fraction of a second, a lingering vibration in the inner ear, then vanishes into the void. The story of Liam O'Connell is finished. The library is closed, for now.